Well, good afternoon. This is our first audio and video lecture for Management 450, Strategic Management and Business Policy. The course does have lecture notes. It does not have lecture notes for this week, and there are no lecture notes posted for next week. So we're going to have lecture notes for tonight. Now, there are some PowerPoint slides that are posted on for week one and for week two. There's about 9 in each that I suggest that you look at and read. Now, what I'm trying to do here with these lectures, and only be 30 to 40, maybe 45 minutes at most, is to kind of get you enticed into what we're talking about, get you some kind of knowledge. And then we're going to discuss the question we have posted in the forum section for our discussion that I ask that each of you answer and then respond to your fellow students' response. I'll respond to each of you once everybody has posted and make sure that we have try to get some kind of dialogue about these discussion questions so we can embellish the learning process. One of the ways that we learn is by interacting with each other, by trading ideas and thoughts and suggestions, etc. And I, pardon me, can assure you that I learn as much as you do from these interchanges, although sometimes it may not seem like that's true, but I really do, and I appreciate that. And I want you to understand, as I mentioned to you in an email I sent about 20 minutes ago, interacting with your fellow students is a requirement in this course. And so we want to see what your thoughts are. We want to see what your responses are to your fellow student. I do ask that you be courteous in your responses and don't attack someone. You can attack positions, but don't attack the individual. As also mentioned, this is recorded. I'll have this uploaded to Campus Web at the conclusion of the lecture. I will also have this available via YouTube, but I won't have that connection most likely for you until tomorrow. But I will send the YouTube link to you at least tomorrow morning, most likely. I'll have it about the first thing when I get in the office. Please, as we go through the course, if you have questions, there's a place in the forum section to ask questions. You can also post them when you send assignments, or you can send me an email. And I'd be more than happy to respond to you, and I try to respond as quickly as possible. Within 24 hours at the most, 48 hours at the outline time. If I'm going to be late, I'll tell you ahead of time that I'm going to be late and why I'm going to be late. Again, some of the lecture notes that you'll find in the course, PowerPoint slides, were actually posted by Dr. Askar Zanoidian, also known as Dr. Z, as several of you may have had in courses before. He's not available to teach the course this time. I took it over. So some of what you find is his work. I've looked at it, and it certainly meets requirements. What I'm going to try to do is add to that to give you a holistic approach to this course. Most of the time, you're going to be working on case studies. Case studies are mentioned. If you don't have the textbook and you can't find the case studies, there is a place that you can access them on Campus Web. And if you're having issues, let me know. They are there. They've been uploaded, so you can do that. This is your capstone course in business management or business administration. And so the final, the final case you're going to work is either Panera Bread or Tesla Motors. And it makes no difference to me which one you select. I sincerely mean that. You can select either one. There's no preconceived notion on my part which one you're going to select. But you need to be thorough in your analysis in all the case studies, but particularly in the final case study, because that goes in with your graduation packet. So people know what you've done. It has an idea of your analysis. Please remember also that this course builds on many of the concepts you've learned in the other core courses, Management 350, Management 420, Management 425, and Management 440. I'll go through this again. Management 350 being management of financial resources. Management 420, theory and practice of leadership. Management 425, organizational behavior and culture. Management 440, ethical and social issues in management, or social and ethical issues in management. I think I flipped it around a little bit. So you should be picking up on what you learned in the past and bringing those things forward. And when you do your case studies, look at the leadership that the person is using, that the CEO, for the most part, we're talking about. What type of leadership is he or she using? What style is pardon me, what style is it? How effective is it? How well are people adapting to that leadership style? Be particularly interested with Tesla Motors if you work that case, because that's an emerging company. That is a technology of the future, if you will. It's here today, but still technology of the future, because we've not built all of the refueling stations that those automobiles are going to need. If you follow the stock market whatsoever, hopefully you didn't follow it today. We took a big hit today. If you follow the stock market, you notice that stock is way high, and yet they've not turned a profit yet. They're getting better. But Elon Musk, who is the founder of the company, is a very aggressive person. He's a free thinker. That's my term. And so he's developed all things. He's involved in the space exploration. He recently had a setback, but we don't expect that will stop him whatsoever. So this is a course of critical analysis, if you will. And you need to think about that. You need to ask yourself questions when you're doing your case studies, and answer those questions as you go through the process. Case studies are very important. You learn from this. And these case studies are all companies that we know: Apple, and JetBlue, and Tesla, as we talked about, Panera Bread, if you take that, Whole Foods Market, among the ones we're going to do. So I think this is an interesting course for you. I think you'll learn a lot in this course. I want you to be critical in your analysis. I expect you to be that way, and I challenge you to do the best that you possibly can. So let's do a little bit of talking here about strategic management. The authors of your text state that strategic management is a series of decisions made by upper management that will determine an organization's direction and ultimate success. Well, we could put failure in that as well, but certainly ultimate success. Pardon me, strategic management, which is actually planning at a different level, usually consists of 4 phases. By the way, I want to come back to a company's failure when I finish this first part, just to give you a little story. That's something to think about. Talking about financial planning here. Notice the authors tell us that this is time-consuming and usually involves the annual budget with little in the way of research. In some ways, we can consider this as an exercise in trying to determine which idea or ideas will rise to the top and which one of those will be supported. You might think of this as competition, and it's very good to think of it this way, because people within organizations, directors of various parts of an organization, or in the case of Procter & Gamble, they're known as brand managers, or other companies as well. Brand managers are always competing for scarce resources. And so they're looking for what bubbles to the surface and what's going to be supported. Forecast-based planning, very important. This is normally a 5-year plan that may incorporate environmental scanning. Note, there is competition for resources, and it can become political, taking us back to something that was mentioned a minute ago about competition. External-oriented strategic planning. 2 kinds of planning and strategic things that anyone does is internal and external. And what we need to remember here, let's digress from my notes a second. Internal scanning are things that we can control. Organization can control that. External, it cannot. So we have to think about those. Now, external, you might be able to influence those, but you cannot control them. So developed by top management with input from consultants, but little or no input from lower levels of management. This is a top-down scenario and can be very troublesome. That's the old thing of do it my way or the highway, etc. Strategic management, remember we talked about strategic management actually planning at a different level consists of 4 phases. But strategic management, at the core, this is planning at all levels and input from those that will have to put the plan or plans into action. So this is getting input from everyone who's going to be affected. Now, by the way, when we talk about everybody who's going to be affected, that's down to the janitors and the custodians. We normally don't think about getting input from those folks because they're at the low end of the totem pole. But does that mean we shouldn't? Just think about that. The plan or plans are developed to be in sync with the organization's goals and objectives. It is also considered to be fluid because it is developed with contingencies. Now let's go back to what I was talking about, success or failure. I was just in Pennsylvania over the weekend visiting with some friends. I should say my wife and I were, and we're traveling the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and we got off a couple of times at the rest stops there. And of course, their rest stops are more than just rest stops on a normal expressway. They have places you can go in and get food and drink and things of that nature. And we were talking, and I just asked my wife, I said, do you remember when all these rest stops on the Pennsylvania Turnpike were Howard Johnson's? How many of us even think about Howard Johnson's anymore? I read a story or heard a story on the National Public Radio a couple of months ago that there was an individual up in upstate New York, I can't tell exactly where, that still has 3 Howard Johnsons. I only even call them franchises any longer. Well, Howard Johnson's, for some reason, is no longer in that business on the Turnpike. Why? I cannot tell you the answer to that, but my guess is it simply didn't keep up with the times. It didn't modernize, it didn't renovate, it didn't do the things that it needed to do. So that's what strategic planning is all about. It's all about long-term success of the company. The authors talk about strategic management having 3 benefits. A clear sense of purpose stemming from the organization's vision. Now, the vision tells us what the organization wants to be or aspires to be. It's not what the organization is. Very good information about the organization's mission statement and vision on page 17 in the text. And some people combine vision and mission statement together. Some people, meaning organizations, and some don't. And remember, the vision statement is forward-looking, whereas the mission statement tells us what the purpose of the organization is. Very good mission statement there for Newport News Shipbuilding, which has been in business for well over 100 years. And the mission statement is pretty simple. It says we build good ships, hopefully at a profit, maybe at a loss, but we always build good ships. Very, very, very short, to the point, succinct mission statement. And continuing here, it's an emphasis on the things that are of strategic importance to the organization. Everything an organization does or does not do is not strategic. And so that's what you're trying to do. They're trying to differentiate between the two. And because this is an integrated effort, there is a better understanding of what lies ahead and how to achieve success. Interestingly enough, and that should not surprise any of you, small business companies tend to have difficulty developing strategic plans. Nevertheless, the authors cite several studies of small businesses that indicate better financial performance for small businesses when they have a strategic plan in place. It's just thinking about that. Now, if you've taken some courses here that, for instance, Business 101, which I teach, Introduction to Business, we talk about having a business plan. And we talk about small businesses need to have a business plan, especially if they're going to try to get financing, et cetera, et cetera. I attended a conference back in March that somebody presented the paper there and said, well, maybe business plans aren't all that good. Maybe not, they're not meant, they don't do what they're meant to do. Well, that's probably not true. We think in many cases that you need a strategic plan, a business plan for a small business to obtain loans or non-traditional lending or financing. And in some cases, the entrepreneurs, or not the entrepreneurs, necessarily the capitalists that are going to do the lending, really don't pay attention to the business plan. They kind of listen to the idea, et cetera, et cetera. But a business plan keeps your focus. And this is what strategic plans do. And I think we need to think about that as we go through this course. This is focusing on things that we want to do. One of the large issues faced by corporations today, and it's prominently mentioned here in the text, is sustainability. This simply means reducing the firm's imprint and the impact of the company's operations on the environment. It's very difficult to do. The sustainability has become a buzz term, a watch term, and in many cases, again, the same conference I attended in March, the gentleman presented a paper right before the one about the business plan that talked about sustainability, and in some cases, it's thinking about talks about people have gotten into sustainability and they're being able to produce more with less raw material. His comment was, well, okay, they do that, but that causes consumers to buy more because there's more out there. And there really is no actual reduction of the organization's impact on the environment in the long run because they're producing more, et cetera. A couple of ways to look at that. I'm not going to go into that too much, but one of the things that companies have to do is to do that. Companies, like all of us, are facing climate change, which brings its own kinds of risks. Now, there are many people who deny climate change. And one of the reasons that people deny climate change is most of us, we average people don't see climate change. We see weather patterns, and we don't see climate change. We're not at the pole. We're not in Greenland. We're not in Iceland. We're not in these places to see where the polar ice cap is receding. We don't think about when somebody says that Glacier National Park in Montana will not have any glaciers within 50 years. What's causing that? Well, it has to be global warming because the climate has changed enough to melt those glaciers. How much of that's caused by man can be considered to be somewhat of a judgment call, because I don't think we have quantifiable standards to prove that. But we have to contribute to it, if for nothing else. We have about 7 billion people on this planet. So we need to think about those things. So what is this thing about strategic planning we have to think about with state sustainability? Well, there's regulatory environment. Even though the United States withdrew from the Kyoto protocols, I think I pronounced that correctly, we still face laws that have been enacted by regions and state governments. California has very strict environmental laws, many of them much stricter than the federal government. Supply chain risk. If we have severe weather patterns, it's going to cause problems with transportation. That's supply chain. India and China both face severe pollution issues. Most of us know about the pollution in Beijing because we hear about it all the time. Beijing has lots of problems. And yet I read an article in the New York Times about 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, written by a correspondent whose family lived in one of the large cities in India. And I'm not going to say which one because I don't remember. But the data there show that most children age 10 and younger have severe, irreversible lung damage because of pollution. And so those are things we have to think about. Product and technology risk. Companies are viewed as being good or bad based upon their stewardship of the environment. Litigation risk. Companies are viewed as large polluters or at risk of being sued. Oil and gas companies have been sued, as we know. On the premise, I want you to listen to this, on the premise that their operations have added to global warming and increased the severity of national disasters. Reputation risk. Companies that are viewed as being environmentally conscious may gain a competitive advantage over their competitors. Interestingly enough, Walmart has come out way on top of this as environmentally friendly organizations. Walmart has a lot of detractors, especially about the way they treat their employees and how they pay their employees and the benefits offered to employees. But yet they have gone out of their way in many cases to talk to their suppliers about being environmentally friendly. They're reducing their footprint, reducing the amount of fossil fuel they use in shipping goods to Walmart. And Walmart itself has been fairly proactive in that. Now, I don't know if Walmart doing this will wash over all the other sins that the company commits. That, by the way, that's my term. But they have really decided that they need to do something. A physical risk. The physical risk means something like if we have rising sea tides, which we do, by the way, that some of the storage areas are going to be compromised, and so that's an issue. Strategic management must consider each of the following when formulating a plan. And I'm going to get to this in a second, a little bit more lead-in. One of the things strategic management must consider each of those risks. I did not say it right. Each of the foregoing risks, which I'll repeat: regulation, supply chain risk, product and technology, litigation, reputation, and the physical risk when formulating their strategic plans. One of the things that an organization must do to develop a strategic management approach is to become a learning organization. You probably heard about learning organizations, at least to some extent, in Management 425. I don't think too many other of the other courses would have talked about that. Management 420 might have, but I don't think as much as what we're talking about here. On the surface, this sounds a little on the goofy side, learning organization. I mean, here's an organization we know is a physical plan of some kind, and we're going to say that's going to learn. Well, actually, it's talking about the people inside that. But the ability of an organization to acquire information, turn the information into knowledge, and then disseminate that to its employees. That's what a learning organization is. And disseminating that knowledge, making it meaningful. Learning organizations excel in 4 areas. The first is very critical: logical problem solving, experimentation, learning from past experiences and from the experiences of others. There's an old saw that goes something like that: those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And there is some credence to that. If we don't learn from our experiences and make changes, then we're going to experience those things all over again. And then finally, the efficient and effective transfer of knowledge. Notice there's 2 hinge points there: efficient and effective. Strategic management incorporates, and we talked a little bit about these previously, environmental scanning, inside and outside the organization, internal and external, strategy formulation, strategy implementation, and finally, evaluation and control. We have to evaluate what we implemented to make sure that it worked and tweak it if it didn't work, and then control that. Environmental scanning, and we're going to talk about each of these, is observing both the internal and external environments, and this is usually accomplished by what we term as a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Normally, strengths and weaknesses come from the internal environment because what we do well, what we need to improve upon. And the objective here is to turn weaknesses into strengths, and then for the external environment, turn threats into opportunities. Once the SWOT analysis is completed, the results must be provided to all concerned. Everybody needs to know this. We can't do this in a vacuum. If we're going to be truly a learning organization, it's impossible to do this in a vacuum. It's important to remember the organization can control the internal environment, as we said before, but cannot control the external environment. As I mentioned before, it can influence the external environment, but it cannot control it. Strategy formulation begins with establishing of the mission statement of why the organization exists, whereas the vision statement talks about where the organization wants to go or what it wants to be. Note that a broad mission statement is not restrictive, but fails to tell the public who we are. Broad mission statement, not specific. Maybe we ought to say, instead of using the word broad mission statement, we ought to talk about generalized mission statement. It's not into specifics. Doesn't tell the company who we are. I stopped because I just noticed that I lost the audio. The audio is back. I hope that we haven't glossed over anything. Fails to tell the public who we are, what we make, and what our market is. And we talked about Newport News Shipbuilding before, and again, that's on page 17. And I really commend you to read that because it's a very short mission statement and it's very specific. Companies also have goals and objectives that we've talked about. A goal is an end state, that is where we want to be or go, while an objective is an activity designed to help us reach the goals. Pardon me. Strategy can be thought of as a comprehensive blueprint, if you will, designed to take the company from its present state, again, to where it wants to be. Firms typically have three different strategies: corporate, business, and functional. Corporate strategies outline the direction of the company, what it wants to pursue in three different areas: stability, growth, and retrenchment. Retrenchment in this case doesn't mean pull back away from something. It talks more about consolidation, perhaps selling some assets to focus on core competencies. A business strategy usually is a specific unit within the organization or a product line, and usually addresses a competitive approach. Also, it could be a cooperative approach. Functional strategy is aimed at a specific operation within the organization to increase competence and to result in a competitive advantage. A competitive advantage is something that a company wants to continue doing because it does it better than its competitors. If it is in something in competition and it does not do something better than its competitors, then it probably ought to get out of that part of the business. Strategy implementation is simply putting all the pieces together, and that includes policies, procedures, programs, and budgets. Now let's look at these. Policies are a set of rules, if you will, for employees to follow, and they support strategy implementation. Programs set the actions to follow. Procedures outline how the tasks are to be performed, and the budget details commitment to strategy in terms of dollars. Normally speaking, a company has two types of resources. Now I'm not talking about raw material brought in. Company has dollars and it has human beings. Any strategy must be evaluated to ensure it is achieving desired results. And of course, a strategy must be controlled if it's to be effective. Henry Mintzberg is a noted management guru. He states that strategy formulation is not a continuous process. Note that Mintzberg and the authors state corporate executives are often lulled into the sense of maintaining the current formula until some major event causes a major disruption. These things are called triggering events, triggering somebody to do something. The authors state that strategic decisions are rare. Now listen to that term, rare, meaning don't follow any previous decision. Consequential, that is, they require enormous commitment of resources in both dollars and humans, employees. And finally, they're directive because they set the tone for the future. A contentious issue today, especially for publicly traded corporations, is whether or not their boards of directors are performing their duties. Boards are set up to oversee top management. Shareholders, stockholders if you prefer that term, but shareholders, have voting rights to elect the board of directors. So they're set up to oversee top management, but not to interfere with top management decisions unless there's problems. The boards, as I said, are elected by stockholders, and in fact, they're accountable to the stockholders. A lot of times they don't pay a lot of attention to that. And when I'm saying here, boards, the companies get bad election results for a board member or numerous board members, and they don't take action to remove them. Now, you may be interested to note that many companies say that if a board member doesn't receive at least 50% of the vote, favorable vote, he or she should be removed. And yet we find that often these people are not removed and they continue. So boards have 5 functions. Set organization's direction, including a mission and vision. Now, they may have top management do both of those, but they're the ones that approve it. Hiring and terminating top management, especially the chief executive officer. Supervising top management, although there's usually some flexibility in this area. Approve the use of resources. And finally, responding to stockholders because they are there to protect the stockholders' interests. A lot of times there's conflict between stockholders and management. Boards have serious duties, and they're spelled out by the Securities and Exchange Commission, among others. And failure to carry them out can cause harm to the organization and possible trouble for the board and for its individual members. And of course, if they're not doing their job, it causes problems for stockholders. Figure 2.1 on page 47 depicts the board involvement with strategic management from little or hands-off approach to taking a more active role in decision making and in setting direction. There are 2 kinds of directors, an inside director and an outside director. Inside director simply means that that person is an employee of the company, and that person usually tends to be at the executive level. when there was when we had the government bailouts of Chrysler and General Motors, and the unions gave in to, oh, that's a bad term. The unions agreed to what management wanted to do, which was going to cause unions to take some hits on salary and a few other things. The unions lobbied for a seat on the board of directors, and they were successful in getting it. Now, who it is of the union that sits on the board of directors, I don't know, but I would suspect it would be a person who holds a high position within the union management itself. And of course, outside directors are just the reverse. The problem with inside directors is that they have a vested interest in doing certain things because they receive a salary from the company. And outside directors don't have that. Securities and Exchange Commission, as I mentioned before, mandated in 2003 that the majority of directors be from the outside. They reasoned that outside boards of directors can be more objective, and they're needed to keep executives in line so that the executives do not push their own agendas. In response to the Enron implosion of 2001 and others, there weren't the only ones, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. And one of its major requirements is that directors serving on a corporation audit committee should not be an employee or receive monies other than directors' compensation. But we have to remember that directors, when they're elected, they're paid by the organization to attend board meetings and do some committee work, etc. So they're not completely outsiders, but their major income does not depend upon what the board refers to, what the board pays them, or what they're paid as board members. Boards are placing greater emphasis on performance and tying executive pay and compensation, to results. In other words, if you are not successful in doing some certain things, then we're going to increase. We're not going to increase your salary, or maybe pull some salary back, or some perks, etc. A case in point, several years ago, I think maybe 4, maybe 3, the chief executive officer of Cincinnati Bell was given a $1 million bonus. And in fact, Cincinnati Bell had not done very well as far as stock had gone and profit, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's disclosure here. I'm a Cincinnati Bell stockholder. And the stockholders really got upset about that and raised so much devil about that that the $1 million bonus was taken back. Now, my point is that the board of directors should have done that in the first place. They should have said, wait a minute, any compensation that we're going to give you over and above your salary in the way of bonuses, et cetera, has to be tied to performance. And it wasn't. This guy was just given that performance, that bonus, and people thought nobody's going to hear any more about it. Boards are placing greater emphasis on performance, like I mentioned, tying executive pay to compensation and to results. Huge institutional investors, such as CalPERS, California State Personnel Retirement System, and the New York State Pension System, are calling for greater transparency and greater improvement in boards and what they're doing and how the boards are overlooking executive compensation. The CEO is responsible for setting the tone and developing a vision and creating challenging goals and a commitment to high performance standards. Now, therefore, the board of directors elected by the stockholders should hold the CEO and other senior executives to that. So this is giving you some background. I think it's a little bit differently approached in strategic management. We need to look at this whole picture of corporate governance so we can understand that. Now, our question today, our discussion question for this week, which is supposed to be to be posted, is to be, not supposed to be, is to be posted in the forums section for week 1, no later than 11:50 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Sunday, July 5th. Is a learning organization approach to strategic management better than the traditional top-down approach? Why or why not? Please be specific in your answer. Saying yes, the learning organization is better, or no, it's not better, it's not sufficient. You need to do a little analysis here. You need to give some critical thought to what you're going to say and to how you're going to say it, and post your response. We talked about learning organization here tonight. We also talked about top-down management. And so you can get some of what I said. You can go back and play what I said, and obviously add to what I said. Just don't take my words for it. Put your own spin on this. Which one is better and why it's better? And have some justification for your response. Now, next week, we don't have a discussion question. However, we will discuss elements to be included in a strategic analysis in the lecture that I present to you. One reason we don't have a discussion question next week is because you're asked to write an essay about the elements that need to be included in what's said there is a viable strategic plan, but we don't have to think about viable. We have to think about a strategic plan that is going to be workable, et cetera, et cetera. So I thank you for your attendance tonight. We spent about 45 minutes here getting a little overview of strategic management. As I mentioned, there are some PowerPoint slides that are posted for week 1. Some of that comes from Henry Mintzberg. I really suggest that you look at those, make sure that you read the text, make sure that you answer the discussion question to the fullest extent possible. And do not forget, if you have not, to complete the engagement assignment that is also required. And of course, there is a point value to the engagement assignment, even though the questions are very minimal. So at 5:15, I thank you for your attention. Please give me some feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like. And I look forward to speaking with you again next week at the same time. Thank you and good afternoon.